Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Friday. Can't believe it's already Friday again. We've made it through another week. Of course, that means that it is time for Britt's Fantasy Blitz. Thank you so much for joining me. I am your host, Britt Flinn. Already see Rex in the chat. Can't wait to see you again for 3 straight days of football. Love that Saturday slate that they have going on tomorrow. While you're there in the chat, make sure to throw all of your questions in because it is fantasy football playoff time. And while you're there, make sure to like and subscribe. That way, you don't miss out on any of our content that we've got throughout the fantasy playoffs. And thank you so much to my producer, Tony, for all the hard work he puts in behind the scenes to give this show a little pizzazz and just take my face off the screen every now and then. Happy Friday, Ryan. What's up, sellers? Great to see you guys. Y'all know what the Friday slate means. We're going to talk about last night's game as much as I don't want to because it was pretty bad. We'll talk about some week 15 start sits, our sneaky cheapies for DFS, our bold predictions, and as always, our sleeper picks for this week. But let's just go ahead and dive right into last night's game because it was ugly. This was an absolute shellacking. I mean, 63-21. The Raiders tripled the Chargers' score. It was, again, an absolute shellacking. You had people calling for Staley's job within the first quarter. Richard Sherman came on in the first half and was talking about how he needed to be fired at halftime. I mean, this was just bad. And it was bad not only because of the point margin, but it was bad because going into this game, or even yesterday afternoon, we didn't even know who the Raiders' starting quarterback was going to be. There was some chatter going on that Jimmy Garoppolo would start. And then Aiden O'Connell went out there and threw for 4 touchdowns and 248 yards. I know that it hurts the Chargers that Justin Herbert is lost for the season, but it really does look like the entire team had just quit on the Chargers. Last time these two teams met, they had 7 sacks, and this time the Chargers couldn't get any pressure at all. Yes, and Rex brings up a very good point that it was worse than the score indicates. A lot of that scoring from the Chargers happened in garbage time. And yes, Staley did get fired. We will talk about that. I'm on it, sellers. Don't worry about it. So let's just go ahead and recap some of these stats just to get through this game. Aiden O'Connell, 20 of 34, 248 yards, 4 touchdowns, and 0 interceptions. Then you had Zamir White filling in for Josh Jacobs, who was declared inactive, 69 yards and a touchdown on 16 attempts. He also had 3 receptions for 16 yards, put up a pretty good showing for somebody that we had not really seen in action before. So if you had the cojones or just the desperation to start him, then you were rewarded. Devontae Adams also finished with a decent game. I know in the first half we were all like, everybody's going to score a touchdown except Devontae Adams. Well, he finally got his, finishing with 8 receptions, 101 yards, and a touchdown. Jacoby Myers, only 2 receptions for 32 and a touchdown, but he did also throw one. Trey Tucker, the rookie, just kind of came out of nowhere. 3 for 59 and 2 touchdowns, a little bit of a slate breaker outside of the Raiders defense. And then you had the rookie tight end, Michael Mayer, 4 for 39 and a touchdown. Now, on the Chargers side, again, a lot of these stats are misleading because this did happen in garbage time. Easton Stick, 23 of 32, 257, 3 touchdowns, and an interception. Austin Eckler, though, Austin Eckler, 5 rushing attempts, just 9 yards. Couldn't get anything going in the receiving game either. Only 29 receiving yards. I know that Kellen Moore was, talking about potentially rotating the backs in and out, but we haven't seen anything from Joshua Kelly or Isaiah Spiller either. So why are you taking out your best running back and completely negating him from the game? Just really puzzling on that front. And it leaves some questions going forward, not only the remainder of this season, but into next year. And we'll get into that a little bit later. Joshua Palmer, only 4 receptions, but he did have that 179-yard reception. So he finished with 113 and a touchdown. Gerald Everett, 5 for 41. It was just not a great game. In the chat, didn't know it got that bad, turned it off after it was 14-0. I don't blame you for turning that game off. I was thinking the same thing. I was actually multitasking and watching the game with one half of my brain and getting ready for the show with the other half because it got out of hand so fast. We complained about last week's Thursday night game being bad. We did not know we were going to get a game like this. So the Chargers linebacker Khalil Mack said this morning that the players still believe in Brandon Staley, but the ownership group told us what they thought about that. As you may have heard, Staley and GM Tom Telesco did get fired this morning. Kellen Moore is safe for now, but I wouldn't be surprised to see him on the outs as well. And I also saw an interesting stat that Mina Kimes from ESPN put up. I know that this coaching job looks kind of enticing, this GM job, but this is a very tricky spot, as she points out. They're going to be 40 million over the 2024 cap space. Allen, Everett, and Eckler led in catches, who are the oldest trio in the NFL. They have a top heavy roster with aging stars, and they don't really have many resources, including draft picks. So it's going to be very interesting not only to see who they hire as GM and head coach, but how they get this team back on track. It's just not a very good situation going on there in LA. And I know that some people had talked about the move from San Diego and into Los Angeles was the worst thing that they could do for the Chargers because they didn't have a built-in fan base there for one. For two, it's kind of a destination stadium where people travel to. So you have no home field advantage. And I think since they've moved to Los Angeles, we've really seen that happen. So, again, enough about the Chargers Raiders. Let's move on to a couple more things, and then we will jump into the injury news, which is lengthy. I'm just going to give you fair warning here. But Cowboys tight end Jake Ferguson has been practicing with his hands in ice water to get ready for the cold and potentially wet conditions that are usually in Buffalo. They also put the players' pictures out on the field. So that was a little interesting, but whatever you can do to get some motivation, right? This game has the highest over under game total of the entire week. So we should see a very exciting game. The Bills have to win this, and so do the Cowboys. So it's going to be really fun and exciting. They're the only game on at 4:25 Eastern, so we should get plenty of coverage from that game. Staying in that NFC East division, the Eagles are, quote, pissed about their past two losses by over 20 points, but they're not hitting the panic button after those losses. This week, they do get a good matchup with the Seahawks, but if Geno Smith is healthy, I really don't count them out because the Eagles' secondary can just not guard anything. I don't think they could protect themselves in out of a wet paper sack. You know what I mean? So I'll give you some time to get your pen and paper before we jump into injury news because, again, it is lengthy. Bringing up some thoughts in the chat here. Rex, if Stick wasn't so terrible, the game should have been closer. I agree. I think that Stick looked awful. His decision making was awful. Some of the passes were way off target. Definitely not great. Not great at all. And happy week 15 to you as well. I hope you started the Raiders defense last night. Here we go. As Robert also says in the chat, here we go. Rod's got a question. Najee, Chandler, or Higgins, PPR? I'm actually leaning Ty Chandler in this game. I think that with Alexander Madison already ruled out, he's going to get the bulk of the work. We've seen that he can be explosive. That matchup is pretty decent for him. With Najee, I just don't know whether it's going to be him or Warren. And splitting those carries, it could be either one on any given day. With T. Higgins, I feel like Jake Browning spreads the ball out way too much. They only got 4 targets between Jamar Chase and then T. Higgins, I believe, got 4 or 3 last week. Just not a great situation for him. So I think I would lean on Ty Chandler this week. And then one final question before we get into the injuries. Moss, D Hop, Javante, sit one in PPR. I think that I might sit Zach Moss. I expected Zach Moss to be great as he was in the beginning of the season, but he just hasn't really shown up. He hasn't really done anything, even against an exploitable defense. Um, Brees Hall or Devonta Smith, um, PPR. I think I'm going to go with Brees Hall in this one. We saw last week how effective he was with Zach Wilson, and that weather is going to be very bad. We'll talk about that later. No, I am not in on CEH with Pacheco out. I'm still very much leaning McKinnon. Um, for Ryan, I am going Chig over Taysom. And for Rod, I am worried about Tyreek Hill. They came out today and said that he would be a true game time decision. And again, the weather in that game is not going to be great at all. But we'll talk about that as we go on further in the show. So let's jump into this injury news. There is a ton of injuries. It's week 15. Everybody's been put through the ringer. So let's just go ahead and get started and run through. And fair warning, it is going to be lengthy. So for the Cardinals, the running back Amari DiMercado, wide receivers Michael Wilson and Marquise Brown are all limited in practice, waiting to hear an update from them today. Um, there's also nothing big for fantasy relevance here, but it is worth noting that four of the five starting offensive linemen for the Atlanta Falcons are questionable. We do know that the Panthers are easy to run on, but it could be a little dicey if they're running with backup linemen the whole way. So temper your expectations with Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier going up against the Panthers as well. We're also looking at Bills rookie tight end Dalton Kincaid, who has been limited in practice all week with a thumb and a shoulder injury. He was once again wearing a red no contact jersey in practice today, so I'm not so sure that he is going to suit up. Bears wide receiver DJ Moore was also limited with an ankle injury all week. I'm hoping that that is more of a maintenance situation than an actual injury, but we'll have to wait and see. The Browns, on the other hand, have a ton of issues in their running back room, and this does concern me. Jerome Ford has been limited in practice with a wrist injury that he did actually end up getting x rays on. It came back negative, but still not sure he's going to be able to play. Kareem Hunt is limited with a groin injury. And then Pierre Strong didn't practice yesterday due to an illness. Again, along with all these injuries, it is cold and flu season. There are a ton of teams that have this bug going around their locker rooms. So, very interesting to watch and see what's going on in that Cleveland Browns running back room. For the Dallas Cowboys, wide receiver Brandon Cooks didn't practice due to an illness, along with Stephon Gilmore, Jalen Tolbert, and then Rico Dowdle was also limited. But we just heard before the show that all of those guys are expected to travel with the team and be able to go, which is great news for them. For the Detroit Lions, wide receiver Josh Reynolds is listed as questionable for Saturday's game. I don't think we're all playing Josh Reynolds unless we're in some super deep leagues, but still interesting to bring up. Now we move on to the Green Bay Packers, and this is where we just have a ton of issues across the board. Both running backs, Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon, are uncertain for Sunday, and Dillon actually revealed that he suffered a broken thumb last week that kept him out of practice all week. For a running back, the thumb, the ball security that comes along with a thumb issue, I don't think that he's going to be able to play. And I don't really know that Aaron Jones is going to be able to suit up either. He's missed a few weeks. He's not been healthy all season long. And that just leaves Patrick Taylor and then Kenyon Drake if they elevate him from the practice squad. And it's not only the running backs that the Packers are dealing with, it's their wide receivers. Jaden Reed and Dontavian Wicks have been limited all week. And Christian Watson still hasn't been able to practice with that hamstring injury. So, not looking very good for the Packers. In the chat, yes, Ryan, it does look like they are the walking wounded. I hope that they are able to push through, especially Jaden Reed, have Jaden Reed all over the place and really want him to perform. So we'll have to wait and see if they're ready to go. The Houston Texans aren't in much better shape than the Packers because CJ Stroud is still in concussion protocol. Nico Collins hasn't been able to practice this week. I don't know if I saw that he was officially downgraded to out or just doubtful, but still, it's looking like neither one of those guys are going to be able to play. And wide receiver Noah Brown has also been limited. So, very tough situation for a team that has already lost one of their wide receivers in Tank Dell. Davis Mills is a competent backup quarterback. He does have experience as a starter, but he's not at that same level as CJ Stroud, especially if he's missing basically all of his wide receivers. Jonathan Taylor is out yet again for the Colts against the Steelers with that thumb injury. No big surprise there. Jaguars running back Travis Etienne is limited with a rib injury all week, along with wide receiver Zay Jones, who is dealing with a knee injury. They get a pretty tough matchup this week. If they are not able to run the ball effectively, And it is something also of note that backup running back Dearness Johnson is limited and questionable as well. So banged up all over the place. And we're only halfway through. And anybody need a break to keep their hand from cramping, writing all this down. Moving on to the Chiefs, running back Isaiah Pacheco hasn't practiced all week. To answer Rex's question in the chat previously, that does not mean that I'm in on CEH. I do think that this goes through Jarrett McKinnon. They have a tougher matchup anyway against the Patriots defense, who has been pretty effective at stopping the run. So I would steer away as much as possible from CEH unless you don't have another option. Rams wide receiver Tutu Atwell has been limited, also being in concussion protocol. And now we move on to the Dolphins. Big names across the board here. Running backs Raheem Mostert and Devon Achane have been not practicing. Wide receiver Tyreek Hill, again, a pure game time decision. I will say that Achane showed up today in practice wearing his uniform. We don't know if he actually participated in practice, but showing up in uniform was a good sign for him. It is the Tyreek Hill situation that has me very concerned, not only because of his ankle, but because of that weather, the Jets secondary, all of these factors coming together. If we've ridden Tyreek Hill into our fantasy playoffs, we may have to look elsewhere, unfortunately. All of the Patriots receivers are questionable across the board, along with running back Ramondre Stevenson. New Orleans Saints wide receiver Rashid Shaheed was limited in practice, along with running back Jamal Williams and Kendre Miller, and tight end Taysom Hill. I expect a big game for Alvin Kamara once again. I do believe that Chris Olave was also sick earlier this week and dealing with a little bit of a toe injury, but I don't think he's on the injury report anymore, which is good news for their passing game. For the New York Giants and all you Tommy Cutlets fans, he may be getting a weapon back. Tight end Darren Waller has been participating in practice, and he could return from injured reserve this week. Now, how much that matters, are they going to be able to get anything going with him? We'll have to wait and see, because we've been burned by Darren Waller over and over and over again, but at least they have another weapon to add to their arsenal. The New York Jets have Breece Hall and Aaron Rodgers limited in practice. Last week, we saw that Hall was limited all week and he still played. So I think this is more of a maintenance situation with him. Seahawks quarterback Geno Smith was limited in Thursday's practice with a groin injury, which is not great news if they have to go up against the Eagles with Drew Lock under center. So we're watching that one closely. Finishing out here, the Tampa Bay Bucks wide receiver Chris Godwin did not participate in practice on Thursday, but he was there today, which is some good news. However, on the defensive side, starting nose tackle Vita Vea was still not spotted at practice. So very bad for their run defense there. Finally, the Commanders running back Brian Robinson did not participate in Friday's practice, leaving the door open for the much maligned Antonio Gibson and potentially Chris Rodriguez. So, let me take a breath after all of those injuries. Again, it's week 15. Everybody's been through the ringer. It's not great for all of us, and that's why you play waivers, and that's why you have us to help you get through all of these tough start-sit decisions. But I want to talk to you about the Bettercast app because we bring it up every week. And I love seeing all of you guys in there, even if I'm not actively in there typing. I love watching this chat. It's gamifying the NFL game day on our app. You can predict what will happen, make picks pregame, make picks throughout the game, and test your NFL knowledge. You can also chat with our community about all the big plays, all the top performers and busts. Watch the NFL games with us this Saturday and Sunday in real time, play our free contest, and win prizes. So you can download the Bettercast app by scanning that QR code on the screen, going to the Apple app and Google Play stores. And since college bowl games start tomorrow, the picks are now live in the chat. So make sure to go check that out as well, as we've got something for everybody there. I've also talked about my matchup previews, which I do every week. That, of course, is part of our Fantasy Alarm All Pro subscription. To get that subscription, which includes all of our content, all of our tools, all of our sports, go to fantasyalarm.com/win to sign up today and use promo code Let's Go for 50% off your first monthly payment, and scan that QR code right there on the screen. So let's get to a couple of these questions. Then we'll cut to break real quick so I can get a drink of water. That injury report just took it out of me a little bit. Ryan says AJ Dillon practiced in full today. That is great news to know. I had not yet heard that at the time of getting ready to go live. So fingers crossed that they do have some semblance of a running game. And then Ann asks, Hal or Trevor Lawrence also have Browning. For what it's worth, I am playing Hal over Trevor Lawrence in a league. I still do not absolutely trust that knee, especially up against that tough matchup. So we're going to have to see what happens there. All right, so let's take a quick break here. When we come back, we're going to get into the startums and situms, do our accountability checks as always, and continue to take your questions. So sit tight. We'll be back in a couple of minutes.
Of the NHL games, I had a conversation with Coop A Fiasco yesterday
Nice.
when we were producing High Stakes, and he was talking about playing video games. And since he covers fantasy football, I said, "Hey, are you going to be getting the new Madden this year?" And he goes, "Yeah, I don't really play Madden. I play NHL." And that tells you, and it really does, that I do feel that the NHL game is better than Madden. I feel like Madden is overrated. The NHL game is so realistic. I don't know if you guys saw the trailer and all the new additions that they added to this game, but it really looks good. I tried finding all the games that I had of NHL, and I thought I had a lot. I only have 4 of them. And that's because I used to live with my my roommate and good friend who got me into hockey, and we would play most of it in his house. So he has most of the games, but I do got 21.
There you go.
I got
There you go.
NHL 18. We got Connor McDavid up there.
There you go.
NHL 12, I think, was the start of the new consoles for me. But the big one,
Okay.
the holy grail of NHL games, NHL 94
Oh, there
for
you
the
go.
Sega
I mean,
Genesis,
there.
right there. Look at that. Look at that beautiful cover. Look at it. Looks like a VHS tape. That's how good this game was.
No, let me stop you right there. So people, VHS tape, if you don't know, it's this like rectangular black plastic with the magnetic tape on the inside. Tape's this big. You put it in something called a VCR. For a little while, there was something called Beta. It didn't last too long.
Look at this cartridge. I mean, they're not cartridges anymore. They're either discs or those little memory cards. But man, that thing is thick, right? And
you don't even need a cartridge or a disc anymore. You can buy the digital version.
Digital version, and then you got Ron Barr on the book. I mean, he used to be always in the intro telling you about the team and what was going to be happening in the game. So NHL 94 is by far my favorite game, sports game. I love that game.
All right, guys, welcome back in. That intro makes me want to headbang. Let's go. Take my hair out of my ponytail and let's just get in the pit. But that's what week 15 is all about, right? We've battled through, we've made it this far. Now is the time to win. And so I think that music is perfect. So let's get into our stardom situms. And as always, we're going to talk about our accountability check, this time with some hits and misses from week 14. The big hit last week, of course, was to start Drake London. He finished as the wide receiver 2 in PPR formats with 29.2 fantasy points. It was wonderful. I loved that so much. Again, he's a wide receiver who's very matchup dependent, but when he does have a good matchup, you can count on him to go off, and go off he did. We also had a start Justin Fields hit, finishing as QB3 with 24.7 fantasy points. Fields is back, baby. He might have lost that first game against the Lions, but he was not going to lose last week. Really liked what he was able to put up. And then we had another hit with Isaiah Likely. Even in what was supposed to be a bad weather game with a tougher matchup, tight end 3 with 19.3 fantasy points in PPR leagues. Great stuff out of Isaiah Likely, and honestly, that entire Ravens defense as a whole. Now, as always, we did have a few misses. Sitting Breece Hall. What is there to say about that? He was absolutely amazing. I thought with Zach Wilson coming back in that he was going to miss those checkdowns that he was getting from Tim Boyle. Spoiler alert, he did not, and he absolutely crushed it. Another miss was to sit Evan Ingram. He had a very, very tough matchup against the Cleveland Browns. They had not been giving up many, if any, tight end points in fantasy. And Evan Ingram said, "Hold my beer and watch this." So, as always, in this segment, we're going to get a couple right, we're going to get a couple wrong. And these are just suggestions in case you don't have, or in case you do have another viable option. I don't want you guys to go out there and pick out a scrub on the waiver wire to replace one of these guys on the sit list if you don't have anyone else. So, before I dive in, yes, Ryan, I am a little bit of a metalhead. Love music all the way across the board. But there's something about metal that just really gets everything going. So let's jump into our stardoms for this week, with my quarterback being Jordan Love of the Green Bay Packers versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, I know that Love had a little bit of a rough week last week. He kind of fell back to earth after really having 3 good weeks in a row. But this is a great spot for him, especially as they're continuing to fight for that playoff spot. Tampa Bay's defense is allowing 264 passing yards per game, and they do have issues in their secondary going into this game, with safety Ryan Neal and cornerback Carlton Davis questionable. AJ Dillon's also dealing with that broken thumb, so even though he is practicing, how much are they going to use him? The same thing with Aaron Jones. Is he going to be ready to go? I think that they're going to have to pass, pass, pass to get this win, and I really like Love to have a bounce back week. So if you've got him in there, start him up, baby. My running back this week is Ezekiel Elliott of the New England Patriots versus the Kansas City Chiefs. Zeke showed us last week that he isn't washed. And no, this is not my Cowboys bias coming into play. If he's in this RB role yet again, he's absolutely going to crush this. Kansas City's defense could not stop James Cook to save their lives last week in the passing game, giving up the majority of his total yardage through the air. And if Zeke sees similar volume to what he did last week with those checkdowns and little screen passes, I really think he can exploit that defense. There's also the issues of all their receivers being banged up and questionable. So I think they'll have to run the ball more than they already have been. So really like Zeke this week against the Chiefs. I'm also going with David Montgomery of the Detroit Lions against the Denver Broncos. I think he's in a great spot this week. He was outcarried and outsnapped by Jahmyr Gibbs last week, but I do think that was a bit of a game script situation where they were playing from behind. This week, they do get the Broncos, who are allowing the most fantasy points to the running back position and rank 30th in rush DVOA. The Broncos secondary isn't really something that you want to test, so I think we get another heavy run game and lots of production from Montgomery. And, of course, Sammy Laporta. Next up, I'm going to go with Zay Flowers from the Ravens facing the Jacksonville Jaguars. And what a performance Flowers had last week, right? 11 targets, 20 fantasy points, even in bad weather. You've got to love what you're seeing out of Zay Flowers. I think that Odell Beckham may have overshadowed him and what he did a little bit because of that revenge game. But if you look at the snaps, Flowers is really the only receiver who's playing a full snap share out of this group. Everybody else is just kind of rotating in and out. The Jaguars also do have allowed a few fantasy points to the wide receiver position. And I think that air raid offense on the Ravens is finally coming together. I'm also going to go with Jaden Reed of the Green Bay Packers versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to kind of pair him with Jordan Love. Now, I know he's questionable, but I think he's going to practice or is going to play. And this guy is an absolute Swiss Army knife, y'all. We saw it last week where he had work in the run game, in the passing game. This guy was all over the place. I imagine much of the same this week, especially with all the injuries in the running back room. And we've already talked about how rough the Buccaneers secondary is, allowing the 6th most fantasy points to the wide receiver. So with his combination of rushing and receiving work he should get, Reed is a very high-end play, in my opinion, this week. For tight end, I'm going to go with Logan Thomas of the Commanders. And it's a little iffy here because he has been a little hit or miss. But when he has faced favorable defenses, he's looked really good. I keep thinking about that Bears game without Eddie Jackson, where he absolutely destroyed, where Sam Howell had eyes for nobody but him. And I think we see something similar here against the Rams. They have given up the 3rd most fantasy points to the tight end position and ranked 29th in DVOA. So if he can see those targets like he saw in that Chicago game, in what should be a negative game script, I really do like him to have a great week, especially in a very thin tight end room right now. Got a couple questions here in the chat before we move on to our sit-ems for this week. If I can find my scroller, which is always the problem because it's the same color as my background. Um, so Dylan asks, likely or McBride full PPR? That is a difficult question. I really do like them both, but I think that I'm leaning Isaiah Likely this week going up against the Jaguars. I think that he has a great week. He's really starting to fit into um, that Mark Andrews role, and I think that McBride has a little bit tougher matchup. Calvo, hello, great to see you in the chat. Ayuk or DK this week? Man, those are both great options. I would say let's monitor the status of Geno Smith going into this week. If Geno plays, I'm going with DK. If he doesn't, then I'm going to go with Ayuk here. And then Howell or Fields? Man, Ann, you've got some tough questions here. I'm going to go Fields. I like that rushing upside. I know that Howell pass doesn't really look great, but the volume's there. With Fields, at least you know that you're getting that rushing upside with him. Um, so let's jump on to these sit-ems for this week. And some of y'all may not like what I've got in these sit-ems, but hey, we play the matchups. That's what we do in fantasy, especially in this point in the season. It's not just the start your stud situation because we do have weather. We do have some injuries. We do have tougher matchups. And all of that can count and make or break your team in these critical playoff situations. So the first one I'm going to talk about is Tua Tagovailoa going up against the Jets. And I've got to be honest, I'm really nervous about the Dolphins in this game. Not only did they drop a very big game against the Titans on Monday night, but the Jets defense has been playing very, very well. And again, I've harped on it so many times. We may be getting some weather, not just rain. It's going to be 20 to 25 mile per hour sustained winds with gusts of 35 miles an hour. So if that's the case, it's going to be a very tough situation for Tua to move the ball downfield. Then you factor in Tyreek Hill dealing with that ankle injury, may not be able to go. Even if he is able to go, he may be hobbled. I think I would temper expectations for Tua this week and expect them to get the majority of their points on the ground. For my running back, I'm going to do a little twofer here with Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet going up against the Eagles. And I don't really feel like we have to spend a lot of time on either of these guys because not only is the matchup bad, they're both just vulturing snaps from each other. They carried the ball 7 and 9 times last week, and in what should be a very negative game script situation against an exploitable secondary, I don't see them running the ball much. I see a lot of passing, a lot of exploiting the Philadelphia secondary. And on the flip side, the Eagles have given up the fewest fantasy points to the running back position in the entire league, and these two aren't going to get it done, especially splitting snaps. This one, again, may be a little bit controversial, but just hear me out. And it's Travis Etienne going up against the Ravens. This is not a knock on him as a back or what he did early in the year, but I am concerned about his health, especially against this offense. He's only put up 45 and 35 rushing yards over the past 2 weeks, and even his involvement in the passing game just hasn't really been there. The Ravens defense is also very, very good against the run, allowing the 8th fewest fantasy points to the running back, ranking 9th in DVOA. In a game that they'll likely be behind in, I'm just not very confident in ETN. And again, this is where that caveat comes in. Don't go pick up some scrub off the waiver wire if you don't have a better option. You just kind of plug your nose and play him. But if he is a flex option that you're considering, maybe look at somebody else on your roster. For the wide receiver, I'm going to go Gabe Davis versus the Cowboys. And this is not just because he is playing against the Cowboys. It is because he is so hit or miss. He was a total ghost last week, getting 0 receptions on 2 targets. And now he does get a tough matchup against the Cowboys secondary. Dallas ranks 6th in pass DVOA. And with as good as they have been this year, I don't think that it's going to be a good day for him. I think it's going to be another ghost game. I would look for a lot more James Cook and Stephon Diggs in that situation. Can't trust Gabe Davis at all, especially in this critical playoff situation. My other wide receiver is Jalen Waddle, and it's for much of the same reason that I don't like Tua. I don't like the matchup, and I don't like the weather. He's going to get either DJ Reed and or Sauce Gardner on the outside, and if the weather is bad, it's going to be even worse. The Jets secondary has allowed the fewest points to the wide receiver position. And even though he played them well the first time around, I just don't like the combination of conditions this week. For my tight end, finally, I'm going to go with Cole Kmet versus the Cleveland Browns. And yes, I know the Browns just gave up a ton of points to Evan Ingram last week, but I don't think Cole Kmet is comparable to Evan Ingram. The Browns are still only allowing the second fewest fantasy points to the tight end, even after giving up that monster game last week. And they rank seventh in DVOA. So I do think this is going to be a big DJ Moore game with the issues in the Browns secondary. So those are my stardom situms. Let's answer a couple questions here before we go to our favorite sneaky cheapies for DFS. Chad says, I rarely disagree, but I'm skeptical on the Jaden Reed situation. Doesn't feel like they want to utilize him as a one-to-one replacement and more as a bad receiving back. You know, I think that they just want to utilize him all the way around. And that combination of targets plus the rushing work that he gets gives him upside that not a lot of other people on this team or frankly in the league have. We're going to have to wait and see with his injury, of course, but I still really like Jaden Reed and that ability out of the backfield. Ryan asks, would I play JSN over Waddle this week? Yes. And I absolutely love him, not only in DFS, but in season long. We talk about how bad the Eagles secondary is all the time, but they are also giving up the second most fantasy points out of the slot and to the slot receivers. And JSN, when DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett have been healthy, his role is in the slot. So I do look for him to go off this week. I'll talk a little bit more about that in my bold predictions. But for now, let's move on and get into our sneaky cheapies. And we had a pretty good week last week. In week 14, our sneaky cheapies were Gardner Minshew, Chase Brown, Drake London, and Cade Otton. So 15.1, 19.5, 32.2, and 9.6. So not too shabby for some really low price players. Let's see if we can do that again this week. For my quarterback, I'm going to go with Matthew Stafford, going against the Washington Commanders. He's been playing some really good football lately. I don't know if it was the thumb, if it was the absence of Cooper Kupp early on in the season, but he's sitting as the QB3 over the past 3 weeks. And this week, he gets a primo matchup against the Washington Commanders. They rank dead last in points per game, yards allowed, pass yards per game, pass yards per attempt, pass DVOA, every metric. Okay. They are dead last. So even if the Rams do get out ahead and use Kieran Williams later in this game, I think Stafford gets his well before they kind of game script him out. Really like him at his salary. And honestly, any of those receivers that you can play. I don't think that there is a bad one in this bunch to pair him up with. For the running back, I'm going to go with Patrick Taylor versus Tampa Bay. And again, this is very contingent on whether or not Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon actually play, but he is only $43 on DraftKings going up against Tampa Bay with what looks like no Vita Vea there to protect the run D. He could be in line for a ton of volume. There is that issue again of Vita Vea being out. And if he is out, this makes this task a lot easier. There really aren't a lot of other cheap running backs who could have that value, but watch for Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon and their status going into this game, because if they don't play, I really, really do like Patrick Taylor. For my wide receiver, I am looking at Odell Beckham at $4,000 going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars. And the Jaguars defense has really been crumbling as of late. They're giving up the 7th most fantasy points per game to the wide receiver position. The Ravens offense has been coming on. As we mentioned, we are finally seeing this air raid offense that Todd Monken had promised us. And although Beckham is not getting as many looks as we like, we mentioned Zay Flowers is getting the bulk of the snaps. In 2 out of the last 3 weeks, he's hit over 90 plus yards, and he has become that deep threat on that offense. The Jags are also dealing with several injuries to their secondary, which I think opens it up even more for Odell Beckham. For tight end to finish us off here, I really like Tucker Kraft. Again, I'm just attacking this Buccaneers defense all over the place. You can definitely do worse here at the price point for tight ends at $3,000 on DraftKings. Last week, Kraft played every single snap. He ran 40 routes, and he caught all 4 of his targets for 64 yards. The Bucks have also given up the 11th most fantasy points to the tight end position, and with his usage, you're going to be hard pressed to find a better, cheaper option than Tucker Kraft. So really, really like him. Rex in the chat asks, "Who's my pivot as a cheap play if Jones does play?" I was also looking at Antonio Gibson because it looks like Brian Robinson is going to be ruled out if he's not already out. Gibson also has that receiving upside. We've seen in negative game script situations that Gibson does get those dump offs, does get those screens that don't necessarily go vertically to the receivers. So I would pivot towards Gibson. He's a little bit more expensive, but I still like him as a pivot if either of those two running backs play. So Ryan asks, here's one garbage quarterback start in Superflex: Mullins in the rain, Ritter in the rain, or Tommy Cutlets in a dome. Man, I don't think I like Ritter. I know he had a great week last week. I'm not seeing it this week. Don't necessarily like Mullins in the rain either. I think I'm going to go Tommy Cutlets in a dome. Makes me feel a little bit better if Darren Waller is back, but don't necessarily like any of those. I know that it's gross. Best of luck to you, especially at this point in the season. The quarterback situation, can we just go on a tangent for a little bit, has been so bad this season. We are just naming off backup after backup after backup, and even these backups continue to get replaced. I lost Justin Herbert, and my backup was Joshua Dobbs in a league last week. So it's very tough. Don't feel bad about making these gross quarterback decisions because I think that we're all in that same boat. So, with that said, let's move on to, you guessed it, our bold predictions for week 15. And it is the moment that you guys have all been waiting for, especially Rex. Been in the chat about it basically the entire show. So I hope you have your predictions ready in the chat so we can talk about them. But as always, I want to talk about some of mine last week that came close. CJ Stroud left early because of injury, so I'll just call that one a mulligan. The Broncos did beat the Chargers, but Brandon Staley didn't get fired until this week. I was this close to coming right on that one. Unfortunately, Devontae Adams didn't sniff wide receiver one numbers, unfortunately. But again, that's what makes this entire segment fun. So let's get into it and talk about some for week 15. First off, I think that the Jets upset the Miami Dolphins. And here's the deal with this. I'm very, very concerned with the injuries to the Dolphins. And it's not just the position players that I've mentioned already on the injury report. It's the issues that they're dealing with on their offensive line and on their defense. 3 of their 5 offensive linemen are questionable. 1 is doubtful. Then we have linebacker Andrew Van Ginkel, cornerback Xavier Howard, and safeties Deshaun Elliott and Javon Holland, all questionable. There's also going to be that really nasty weather. So I think that they find it hard to move the ball downfield for both teams. And New York's defense is just a little bit enough better that they can pull out this win. It's going to be very interesting to see that. Ryan in the chat says Jordan Love 4 touchdowns and Tucker Kraft catches 2 of them. Hey, I'm on board with that. Let's give me all of that, because then the stardoms and the sneaky cheapies pan out for our accountability check next week. I love that call. My second bold prediction for this week is that Jackson Smith and Jigba torches the Eagles for 2 touchdowns. And we got asked that question earlier about JSN. We know that the Eagles do allow a ton of points to the outside wide receivers, but they've allowed the second most fantasy points to slot receivers. We've been waiting all season for a JSN breakout day. And I think especially if Geno Smith is hobbled and plays, that he's going to look to throw some shorter passes to the slot since they don't really have a great tight end. Lockett and DK Metcalf are field stretchers. I think that he looks towards JSN early and often and that he exploits that secondary. So Rex has one, Miami, New York Jets, excuse me. Both running backs combined for 250 plus yards and 2 touchdowns. I love it. I think that's great. And it definitely fits into the narrative that we've been talking about with the weather. I think that this is going to be a very run heavy game with 35-mile-an-hour gusts. You're just not going to be able to move that ball downfield. It's even if you do pass, it's going to be very short passes. That wind is going to take away a lot of your offensive dimension. Chad says Jake Browning and Derek Carr will finish as the bottom two quarterbacks. I could see that. I definitely could see that. Not so much about Derek Carr. I think that Kamara buoys him a little bit, but the Jake Browning hype is getting just a little out of hand, in my opinion. Chad also says Pierre Strong will lead the Browns backfield in yards, but none will top 40 yards. I can see that too. The Browns backfield is quite the mess. Let's move on to my next one, and then I'll hit a couple more of these in the chat. I think that Ezekiel Elliott is the RB1 overall in back-to-back weeks. I absolutely love Zeke this week going up against the Chiefs. We talked about it a little bit earlier. James Cook went absolutely insane on them last week. He put up 83 yards through the air, and with all the Patriots wide receivers hobbled and or questionable to play, I think that Zeke once again plays a huge, huge role in this passing game. Efficiency be damned. Okay. If Zeke is getting these carries, he's going to put up yards on the ground. He's going to get those catches. And the Chiefs actually do rank 30th in rush DVOA. And with some injuries on their defense as well, I think that Zeke absolutely crushes. My final one, Christian McCaffrey gets 2 touchdowns and Debo gets a rushing touchdown against the Cardinals. I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on this. The only thing that makes it bold is this hat trick and delegation of touchdowns, in my opinion. It looks like McCaffrey is almost a guaranteed touchdown waiting to happen, but especially against this Cardinals defense. They've allowed the second most fantasy points to the running back position, including 16 rushing touchdowns. So I love these two to absolutely eat. There are a couple more bold predictions in the chat. Rex, Carolina, Atlanta. Pitts is the leading receiver in the game. I like that one. The Panthers have actually been pretty good against the tight end, so we'll have to see if that usage pans out. And actually, Arthur Smith takes the Ferrari out of the garage, as we like to say, and needs 2 in PPR. Brandon Cooks, Curtis Samuel, Dubs, or Mechie. I'm going to go Brandon Cooks, and I think I'm going to go Romeo Dubs here. Look to the status of Cooks, though. I know he has been battling with an illness. If he is not better or is hobbled, then I would pivot to Curtis Samuel. Rex also says Buffalo, Dallas. Allen won't turn the ball over, and the Bills still lose. I like half of that, but I don't like the next half, and I'll tell you why. Rex also says Arizona, San Francisco. McCaffrey and Samuel both get rushing and receiving touchdowns. We're looking like we're in lockstep on that one, friend. And then, Anne, what are my 2 surefire survivor picks this week? Can pick any team. Let me PM you with that one because I have not looked enough into Survivor, and I'm honestly just a little worried about all of these injuries and what's going on. So let me get back to you on that this week. Chad, a couple more before we move on to Sleeper because we've already moved through the majority of the show. As always, it's crazy. Time flies when we're having fun. Chad says Davis Mills finishes as a top 5 QB. Interesting there, especially with all the issues in their receiving room. Rex says Mahomes turns the ball over 2 times. I would not doubt that. He has not been playing well at all. And says Kamara, 3 touchdowns. Love that as someone with Kamara on my fantasy team. And then Ryan says that Olave is a game time decision this week. Yeah, not something that we want to hear, especially with all of those other injuries to Rashid Shaheed, Taysom Hill, everybody else on that Saints offense. It is rough going in the Big Easy. All right, so let's move on to my favorite part of the show, aside from the bold predictions, because I love talking to you guys about your bold predictions. But you know that we have a brand new partner here on Britt's Fantasy Blitz, and that is Sleeper. Sleeper is also offering a new contest called Santa's $1 million Picks Giveaway on the Sleeper app. You can play picks between now and December 25th to enter. As always, you choose higher or lower on individual player statistics, get them all correct, and you win. You can pick from a variety of statistical categories in the NFL and NBA and add additional players to increase your payout. Now, each pick entry must be at least $5 to qualify for the Santa's giveaway, with up to 4 entries daily per user. The winners will be randomly chosen on 12/26, and the top 10 prizes are fully withdrawable. And we are talking big prizes here, people. First prize is 100 grand, second 75 grand, third prize is 50 grand, fourth is 20, and fifth is 10 grand. So some really big money to be had by playing sleeper picks right now. And as always, the more you play, the more chances that you have to win. So sign up today at fantasyalarm.com/sleeper on your mobile device and use promo code VAULT3 for a 100% deposit match up to $100, or scan that handy QR code on the screen. I always have my articles there over at Fantasy Alarm for you. But let's go through a couple of these for this weekend because I think that there are some interesting ones. I had great picks with these on Sunday, but unfortunately, Tyreek Hill and Justin Jefferson both getting injured absolutely killed me. So let's hope for no more injuries, shall we? All right, my first sleeper pick of the week is Christian McCaffrey, more than zero point 0.5 anytime touchdowns at a 1.25 multiplier. We've kind of already mentioned that McCaffrey has a nose for the end zone, and he gets a great matchup against the Cardinals this week. He has scored 12 rushing touchdowns and 5 receiving touchdowns in 13 games this year. I absolutely love this against the Cardinals. Next, I'm going Josh Allen, more than zero point 0.5 interceptions at a 1.56% multiplier. I cannot talk today for some reason. And Rex, this is why I liked one half of your bold prediction, but not the other one, because I do have Josh Allen throwing an interception here. He's got 14 interception on the season. And in fact, there have only been 2 games this year where he hasn't thrown an interception. Dallas is averaging 1 interception per game, ranking 4th in the league. So I do expect this trend to continue. Again, that is Josh Allen, more than 0.5 interceptions. Next, we're going to go with James Cook, more than 23.5 receiving yards. James Cook was really heavily utilized in the receiving game last week, with Kansas City blanketing the Bills receivers, and I think we see much of the same this week. Dallas is only allowing 3.46 receptions to the running back per game, but with Cook's average of 10.29 yards per reception, I think he hits this mark and potentially even more. I also am looking at Joe Flacco to have more than 229 passing yards at a 1.77 times multiplier. Look, Joe Flacco's been looking good since taking over as the Browns starting quarterback, and he does get a good matchup against the Bears this week that are allowing an average of 230 passing yards per game. The thing with Flacco here is that I really do think that the injuries to Jerome Ford and Kareem Hunt cause him to throw the ball more than he has, and we've already seen how he loves to huck it and chuck it down the field. In the past 2 games, he's thrown for 254 and 311 passing yards, so I don't expect him to have any problems this week. Finally, I'm wrapping up with Jerry Jeudy, less than 0.5 touchdowns. I don't like to count against touchdowns, but there's something about Jerry Jeudy and this multiplier that it almost seems like a free square. He's only scored 1 touchdown in the entire season because that honor goes to Cortland Sutton. I've really been waiting for Jerry Jeudy to emerge in this offense all year long, and I just don't think it's happening, especially against the Lions, who are kind of fighting for their playoff lives. So those wrap up our sleeper picks of the day. I would love to hear yours as well. Again, to sign up, go to fantasyalarm.com/sleeper, use the promo code VAULT3, and first-time users get a 100% deposit match up to $100. And to enter in the Santa's $1 million giveaway, you can enter up to 4 times daily. Just make sure that that is $5 minimum. So there we go. We've got a couple more questions in the chat, and we're almost done. Again, where does the time go? I have so much fun with you guys here. Sellers is asking Josh Allen or Purdy. I think I'm going to go Josh Allen here. I really do like Purdy, but I think with this game script that it's going to be very heavily influenced by the run game. Josh Allen's going to throw the ball all game long. That game's going to be back and forth. Fingers crossed, hopefully, with the Cowboys winning. But I do think that Allen is the better play here, especially at home. And I think that you're a rock star. Thank you so much for being here all the time. I love helping answer your questions, and just having you as part of the family just makes this all worth it to me. And then James has a question. Missed most of the show. Hey, that's okay. You can go back and watch it on our YouTube channel at Fantasy Alarm or the Better Sports Network. Am I crazy to bench Tua for Flacco or Levis? I don't think you're crazy for benching him for Flacco. Now, I would not bench him for Levis, but he was in my sit section again because of that weather and the lack of options. And then one more final question: Lockett, McLaurin, or Chuba at the flex? I think I'm going Lockett here, especially if Geno plays. Um, Other than that, I'm going to pivot to McLaurin. So hope that helps. We will be around all Sunday morning answering your questions. We will be in the Discord with all of those Saturday games, so make sure to jump in there. To get into the Discord, make sure that you purchase that Fantasy Alarm All Pro subscription. Go to fantasyalarm.com/win. Use promo code Let's Go for 50% off your first monthly payment, and download the BetterCast app. We're all in there. We've got questions, we've got college, we've got NFL, we've got the community, and you can answer questions to win tickets to redeem for real, authentic merchandise. So on Sunday, I mentioned that we'll be in the Discord on Saturday, but on Sunday, it's business as usual with our Sunday morning Start Sit show with John and Pemba and myself at 9 a.m. Eastern, Howard Bender and Andrew Cooper on Sirius XM at 10 a.m. Eastern, and then Coop and Pemba at 11 a.m. Eastern to wrap everything up back here on this channel. So that's going to do it for us. Thank you so much for joining. Coming up next, 4 to 5 p.m. Eastern, we have the Better Sports Betting Show with Dan Servidideo and Howard Bender, followed from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern with the NBA DFS Live Show with John and Pimba and James Grande. Until then, I will see you guys on Monday. Have a great weekend. I hope that you take home those wins in your playoffs. And until Monday, have a great weekend, and thanks for getting blitzed.